the Kahanists here in California were sending tens of thousands of dollars, often every month, to the Israeli Kahanists. And part of the reason for doing so was in order to buy up land from poor Palestinians who were, in a bind by offering them, outrageous sums of money in order to buy up apartments in Hebron and on the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem, the places closest to the holy sites for Judaism and for Islam. And so with the money they were sending, they would acquire little by little more land and more land, thus dispossessing Palestinians further and further. Now, as I said, Irv Rubin is now dead. He's been dead since 2002. But in 2010, V, who is still in jail, he decides that, okay, that's all well and good, but I want my money back. I put $50,000 into this movement, and I now got nothing to show for it. I want those funds in return. And so he reaches out to Irv Rubin's son, Ari, who at that point is still alive. And he asks him, who's responsible? I want my money back. Who do I need to talk to? And Ari tells him that he needs to talk to T. T's the one who took his money and used it to buy Palestinian land. And who is T? Just some rando? No. He's not a rando. He's a two-time terrorist. This man, Yair Pinhas Attali, if you can imagine this, is a two-generation anti-Arab terrorist. His mother even was a terrorist, working for the OAS. The Attalis grew up in Algeria. At that time, Algeria is going through its own struggle for independence and fighting off the French occupation. The number one terrorist group responsible for thousands of dead French citizens is the OAS. The OAS were those who fought back against the liberation movement of Algeria, those who bombed Arab targets in order to crush that movement for liberation. And his mother was one of the people who ferried bombs back and forth for this terrorist group. So he already has a long-standing history. And eventually his family moves. Algeria becomes independent. He moves with his family. There's a photo of one of the many terrorist acts that they're responsible for over the years, the OAS. And he and his family eventually move to Paris. And he grows up there. And at this point, France is a hotbed of neo-Nazism. There's this very strong white supremacist movement there. So the Israeli government decides, we need to train some young Parisian Jews to fight back and defend themselves from these neo-Nazis. And so they bring Attali and other of his cohorts to this Mossad base just north of Tel Aviv, and they train them there. They train them in combat, in gunplay, in bombcraft, all the skills they need to wreak havoc. And the idea was that they'd go back and use these skills to attack neo-Nazis. And they did so. But very quickly, they began using these tactics against any political opponent. They would attack anyone who was an anti-Zionist, anyone who was pro-Palestinian, any manifestation of support for Palestinian rights. They would physically attack them in the streets using these terrorist tactics that they'd learned in Israel. He and his friends, they were, the French government brought charges against this cell, but Attali himself managed to evade any consequence for his actions, which, according to a French film director who made a documentary film about Attali, he told me that amongst other crimes he's suspected of is setting off bombs in an Arab library or an Arab bookstore in Paris while there's people in it. So this sick bastard moves to Israel, evades any serious punishment, and since then, he's transformed himself. He was a city councilor in Kiryat Arba, the far-right settlement outside Hebron. But he's also made a real estate empire. He's transformed himself into a real estate mogul. And he gets money from, by his own admission, mostly American sources. And with this money, they manage to convince poor Palestinians who are in financial straits to sell them their properties so that they can Judaize these areas, these places that are, there's so much tension there, where the conflict is so seething. This is Attali.